Our final clip in this module is to deal with a particular issue which you'll find the notes for in the notes section of your module. And that's dealing with the concept of tabernacle or temple and the Ark of the Covenant. The reason why I want to talk about this now is because I believe that it's vitally important for us to understand the importance of tabernacle, the importance of finding the place of meeting for God. And what you need to see is that when, in fact, the Israelites would ever stop during the time in the desert, they would stop and the first thing they would do would be erect the tent of meeting or the tabernacle. And that would be the first thing that they would build. And after that, they would then settle each of the tribes. And what the tribes would do is that they would settle around the tent. And so the tent would be the focal point of the whole community. Now that's a very important thing because it's not only a physical thing, but it also was a spiritual reality. And so therefore the tabernacle is a spiritual reality, not only a physical one. Reminding yourself that the people who were putting this all together were in exile in Babylon at the time. For them, they didn't have the temple. The temple had been destroyed by the Babylonians. They didn't have that focal point. And so what they did was they transferred the focal point into Scripture. And so that's why Torah becomes such an important thing during the time of exile, because they had nothing else. They didn't have a place to sacrifice. They didn't have a place to come and do those ritual things. They didn't have that focal point of community. And so in some ways what happens is that that concept of God's presence gets transferred into Scripture, at least for some of the people and for some of the leaders. Because I believe what happens in exile is a split in Judaism. And it begins from 586, and then that split continues on a parallel course until Jesus in the New Testament. Jesus representing one side of that split, and the Sadducees and the people in the temple, the other side of that split. And so what happens is that continues through until 70 AD, when in fact the second temple is destroyed by the Romans. And once that temple is destroyed, that whole branch of Judaism essentially withers and dies away, and the other branch continues. Now, what are the branches I'm talking about? Well, if you look at pre-exile, you see that the main branch of Judaism is what you could call cultic Judaism. It's based in the cult of Judaism. So it's based in rituals and in sacrifice and in killing lambs and doves and animals and so on. It's based in sacrifice. And the symbol, or the thing that binds that sacrifice together, is the Ark of the Covenant. Now, you can read for yourself about the development of the Ark of the Covenant, but the Ark of the Covenant is essentially a gold covered box which was inside the tent of meeting. And later on, when in fact Solomon builds the temple, it gets moved into the Holy of Holies, a place which is only entered once a year during the Day of Atonement. But the Ark of the Covenant comes to symbolize God's particular presence. And not just His presence generally, but His presence particularly for forgiveness, for what they call propitiation. That it's on that particular ark, on that seat between the angels, that God is present, where God receives the sacrifice of the people in order to release them, in order to give them freedom again, so that they may be forgiven for the times when they've stepped outside the boundaries of law. What you need to see and what you need to connect with is the fact that it's in the midst of that process of connecting with others. It's in that process of the ark that goes all the way through until the exile. But it's at the exile that the ark disappears. The ark disappears. In fact, it disappears slightly before the Babylonians and is never heard of again. Of course, that is until Indiana Jones. No, but of course Indiana Jones is just fiction. But we've had lots of connections with saying, well, where is the ark now? There's some who believe that the ark is in Ethiopia. There's some people who believe that the ark was destroyed. Some believe that it went to Iraq to Babylonia. Some believe that it was still in the Temple Mount. Regardless, it disappears from history. One of the greatest artifacts of all time disappears. The thing that we need to ask ourselves is not where it is today, because to some degree that's irrelevant. What is relevant is not where it is today, but what did the Jews do when they realized they no longer had it? You see, the thing is that in exile, they would have very quickly realized that they didn't have the Ark of the Covenant. And we know they didn't have it because we know that Titus, when he invaded Jerusalem, went into the temple to go and have a look at what was this thing that was in the Holy of Holies in the temple. And what did he find? He found that the Holy of Holies was empty. It was empty. Now that means that one faction of Judaism knew that the very symbol of God's presence for forgiveness was no longer there. And I think that started a whole new branch of Judaism. The branch of Judaism that was to continue. In fact, it was part of the fig tree that wasn't withered, that wasn't producing fruit, that Jesus talks about killing off, is really the part of Judaism which was the priestly framework, the cultic one. Instead, Jesus says, no longer will you need the temple, no longer will you need that branch of Judaism, but rather what you would have is a new body. Effectively, you'll have me. And what he was really thinking about, what he was talking about, was that other branch of Judaism, what we now call the rabbinical branch, the branch based in synagogues rather than in the temple. The branch that was based in prayer and in Torah, in the written word, rather than in cultic sacrifice. And so we see that change that happens within Israel. It's a major change. It's a major difference. And what you need to see in the Tanakh is this constant tension between these two branches, which will now live simultaneously until 70 AD. It's only after 70 AD that the cultic branch will die and the rabbinical branch will continue and thrive. It's out of that rabbinical branch that Christianity and Jesus comes and flourishes as well. It's the branch that talks about prayer and coming to the Holy of Holies yourself as the means of forgiveness that we see developed through that process. The temple, though, is still more than anything else about the presence of God. What we see the prophets, and we'll deal with that in Module 8, try to tell them is that what they've done is they've domesticated God. They've captured Him in the temple rather than seeing that the temple is meant to be the particular presence of God. It now becomes the symbol of God. It now becomes a domesticated God. What we see in Tanakh, what we see in Torah, is that God cannot be domesticated. God cannot be confined to our creations. We rather need to conform to His creation, to live within His law, to live within His boundaries. For when we do, we will live within His blessing. And when we live within His blessing, so we are enabled to become a blessing.